9 million people were expected to fill American stadiums for a sport this country has spent 3 decades pretending not to care about. And then it happened anyway. Somewhere between a goalless draw in New Jersey and a stunned crowd in Seattle, something quietly cracked open in the American sports psyche, and nobody had a name for it yet. This is a story of a tournament that arrived wrapped in skepticism and left behind a country that looked, for the first time in a generation, genuinely unsure of its own sporting hierarchy. It did not happen with a single moment. It happened in increments, in living rooms, in bars, in the eyes of children watching a goalkeeper from a nation smaller than most American counties become an overnight icon. To understand how deep this went, you have to go back to where American soccer story actually began. In 1994, the United States hosted its first World Cup, and the tournament left behind more than memories. It left behind an obligation. FIFA had required, as a condition of hosting, that the country build a top-tier professional league. And that requirement became Major League Soccer, launched in 1996 on the back of a $50 million surplus and a wave of cautious optimism. For years afterward, soccer occupied an odd space in American life. It was played by millions of children in suburban leagues, yet dismissed by much of sports media as a foreign curiosity. Too slow, too low scoring, too unlike the explosive comebacks and statistical spectacle that come to define American athletic entertainment. Analysts pointed to structural reasons for this resistance. Football's discrete, stoppage-filled rhythm mapped naturally onto prop bets and constant data streams that had reshaped American sports consumption, especially after the Supreme Court's 2018 ruling that opened the door to legalize sports betting nationwide. Soccer's continuous flow and modest scoring did not fit that model as easily, and a perception of the sport as low drama calcified into something close to received wisdom. By early 2026, that wisdom was already being tested. Numerator research found that nearly a third of American adults planned to watch the World Cup, up sharply from the start of the year, and YouGov data showed a striking figure. 43% of American sports fans said hosting the tournament was itself the reason they intended to tune in. Nielsen, in an October survey, reported that more than a third of the general population expected their interest in soccer to grow over the following year and a half. These were not the numbers of a niche sport quietly persisting on the margins. These were the numbers of something building toward a threshold. Then the tournament began on June 11, 2026, spread across 16 host cities in 3 nations, and almost immediately the data started outpacing even the optimists. YouGov's tracking showed that public buzz around the event, measured by whether Americans had heard something positive about it in recent weeks, was already nearly 3 times higher a week before kickoff than it had been at the same point ahead of the 2022 tournament in Qatar. By day 5, that figure had climbed even further, and the generational divide was telling. Among Gen Z adults, buzz peaked at more than 40, compared to 25 during the previous World Cup. Millennials showed a similar surge. Even baby boomers, historically the most resistant demographic to soccer's charms, registered noticeably higher engagement than 4 years earlier. The share of Americans who said they followed soccer regularly had risen from 8% in late 2022 to 12% by the first quarter of 2026, a jump that might look modest on paper, but represents millions of new, sustained fans in a country of this size. The scale of the event itself helped drive that shift. This was the first World Cup expanded to 48 teams, and the first ever hosted jointly by 3 nations, producing a record 104 matches. The United States alone would host 78 of them, a logistical undertaking without precedent in the sport's history. Attendance figures broke records almost from the opening whistle. By June 25th, cumulative attendance had already surpassed 3.6 million spectators, eclipsing the mark set by the 1994 tournament that had once seemed untouchable. Stadiums across the tournament averaged close to full capacity through the group stage, according to an analysis of FIFA data, a detail that surprised even seasoned observers of American sports economics. Television numbers told a parallel story. Fox's broadcast of the United States men's national team defeating Australia drew more than 16 million viewers, a figure that continued climbing as the Americans advanced into the knockout stage. Sports marketing analysts who had spent careers watching soccer struggle for a foothold in American media noted something they had not quite seen before. It was not simply that people were watching. It was that people had long dismissed the sport as bored with discovering Almost against their will, that was not. The tournament's emotional register seemed to matter as much as its ratings. Analysts pointed to the visible passion of traveling fans and immigrant communities, for whom the World Cup functioned less like a sporting event and more like a national holiday transplanted onto American soil. And that passion proved contagious in ways raw statistics could not fully capture. Individual moments accelerated the shift. Cape Verde, a nation of roughly 500,000 people making its first ever World Cup appearance, advanced further than anyone predicted and pushed Argentina to the brink in a match that briefly became the most talked about storyline of the tournament. Their goalkeeper, a 40-year-old veteran named Vozinha, delivered a 7-save performance in a scoreless draw against a heavily favored Spanish side, and within days he gained more social media followers than Tom Brady, one of the most decorated athletes in American sport history. For a country that measures athletic greatness in championships and highlight reels, watching a virtually unknown goalkeeper from one of the world's smallest nations become an overnight sensation offered a different kind of lesson about what global sport actually means. None of this occurred in a vacuum separate from American soccer's existing infrastructure. Major League Soccer, which had grown from a fledgling experiment into a 30-club operation spanning the United States and Canada, treated the tournament explicitly as a launch pad. League Commissioner Don Garber described it as an opportunity to convert global attention into lasting momentum for the domestic game, and the league was already preparing structural changes to align itself more closely with the international calendar, including a planned shift toward a European-style fall-to-spring season beginning in 2027. Lower divisions benefited as well. The United Soccer League and independent clubs saw expanded television visibility. The kind of exposure that had been difficult to secure before the tournament made soccer unavoidable in American media coverage. The economic dimension of this transformation was staggering in scope. A joint study by FIFA and the World Trade Organization estimated the tournament could add as much as $40 billion to global GDP, supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs worldwide, with roughly $17 billion and 185,000 jobs attributed to the United States alone. The New York and New Jersey region, which will host the final on July 19th, projected over $3 billion in regional economic impact tied directly to World Cup activity. FIFA President Gianni Infantino, speaking at a Washington forum earlier in the year, framed the American market as the sport's next great frontier, arguing that the revenue generated would flow back into football development not just domestically, but across more than 200 countries. Whatever one makes of the promotional framing, the sheer scale of investment from global brands, from Adidas and Coca-Cola to Bank of America and Visa, signaled the belief that America's relationship with soccer had genuinely changed. Not everyone agreed that the shift would prove permanent. Skeptics, drawing on the pattern of prior near breakthroughs, from the original 1994 tournament to the rise of the U.S. women's national team, pointed out that American soccer had been declared on the verge of a permanent cultural arrival many times before, only for enthusiasm to recede once the spotlight moved elsewhere. Focus groups conducted with Gen Z sports fans found genuine excitement around the tournament, but also a tendency for that enthusiasm to soften quickly if the American men's team exited early, along with lingering complaints about low scoring and unfamiliar pacing. The question of whether 2026 will be different than 1994 hinged less on the tournament spectacle and more on what got built in its aftermath. Youth participation rates, sustained television contracts, stronger domestic leagues, and the everyday habit of young fans who had never before organized their summer around a soccer match. What made this tournament distinct from its predecessor was a foundation it stood on. The America of 1994 introduced soccer to a public with little institutional memory of the sport. The America of 2026 already had that memory. A 30-year head start youth leagues, a maturing professional circuit, and a generation of players raised inside a football and culture their parents never had. The World Cup did not need to convince this country that soccer existed. It needed only to convince it that the sport belonged at the center of American attention rather than its periphery. And for over a month, in stadiums built capacity and living rooms filled with unfamiliar excitement, it did exactly that. Whether this becomes a moment historians point to as soccer's true arrival in the United States, or simply another peak in a long and uneven climb, may not be answered for years. What is certain is that for the length of one extraordinary summer, a country famous for looking inward toward its own leagues turned its gaze outward, toward 11-year-old goalkeepers from tiny island nations and record crowds chanting in a dozen